Welcome back to another FPL video. Today I'll be talking about my team selection where I've activated the wild card and I definitely need it after my poor start to the season. Game week 1 was fairly good, game week 2 not so bad, but ever since it's just been red arrow after red arrow. I'll talk about how I did in double game week 7, some of my mistakes and also some things that switched the other way, but how I'm going to deal with all of these setbacks and build a really good wild card squad for maybe the next few months basically, and I'm fairly confident that there should be a turnaround. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Smash the like button if you enjoy it. Let's try to get this video to 300 likes, and we're also 100 subscribers away from 21,000. That is the next milestone we'll be looking to achieve by the Saturday deadline stream. Be sure to tune in for that as well. It'd be great to have you on there. But without further ado, let's jump straight into this video. Apart from game weeks 1 and 6, Onana has been a huge disappointment, and I'm quite surprised actually. I thought Man United would have a solid start to the season considering their fixtures, but they have had one of the worst starts in their history, especially in the Premier League era, and you have to go back to 1985 or 1986 to see a similar start to their campaign. But Onana could come good eventually, of course he could, and he was one of the best goalkeepers in the Champions League last season, but he has made a few mistakes. Man United keep on conceding chances, and if you compare the amount of chances they concede this season to the last campaign, there is a night and day difference, which doesn't help Onana at all. But ultimately, he is one of the first players I'm looking to sell, despite the fact that he's a goalkeeper. Some of the only positives in double game week 7 came in the heart of the defence, with William Saliba keeping a clean sheet and getting 6 points against Bournemouth in a 4-0 victory. He had a decent performance, but I think other defenders definitely stood out, like Ben White, who scored the 4th goal, not to mention the attacking players like Bukayo Saka and Martin Odegaard, who was man of the match. But Saliba has been a steady Eddie, you could say, and he has been a solid option for me this season, and definitely not one of the worst players I've had. He has consistently gotten me some decent 5 or 6 pointers, and even against Crystal Palace in game week 2, he gave me 2 bonus points on that occasion and giving 8 points overall. But on the wild card, I am considering selling him because of the fixtures. They're not bad, by the way, for Arsenal, but I just think other defenders have more attacking potential, and with better fixtures for those clubs, I think it is worth selling Saliba from that perspective, but he's still a solid option on the wild card if you choose to go for an Arsenal defender, and the alternative would be Gabriel, who is now 4.7 million, so I think he's also a very solid shout. And then comes one of my transfers in for game week 7, Kieran Trippier, who got a 12-pointer, so one of the best transfers I've made in recent weeks, and definitely one of the best I've made all season. But the disappointment comes with the fact that I also took a -4 hit to bring in Sven Botman, who ended up being injured, and Estupiñán comes off the bench anyway for a -2. So in the end, I lost 6 points from that. And I was also considering bringing Botman in last week against Sheffield United, and he scored on that occasion and got a double-digit return. So the timing on my transfers has been a bit unfortunate. I ultimately got it wrong, and I do feel a bit hard done by, but that's FPL sometimes. You've got to take it on the chin. But I just think getting a -4 or taking a -4 hit for Botman was definitely a disaster. The only saving grace is that part of that -4 hit was bringing in Kieran Trippier, who got 12 points. This was probably the worst performance of the season for my midfield, with the exception of Saka, who scored against Bournemouth. He did come off with a knock, played a few days later against Lens, and now he is once again a doubt for game week 8 against Man City, but he did his job, scored the opening goal for Arsenal. It was a tap-in, and Saka's goal output has been absolutely phenomenal, and the underlying numbers do suggest that he can sustain this over the course of the season. And I have to say, over the last year or so, he has been one of the best players in the Premier League, and definitely one of the best FPL assets on top of that. The same can't be said about Mbeumo at this moment in time. He got a 2-pointer, and maybe I was a bit unfortunate here because Mbeumo should have got a penalty against Nottingham Forest. It wasn't given, and Mbeumo won it, and he also would have taken it himself. So maybe I was a bit hard done by with that. And Mbeumo is generally a decent FPL option for his price point, but with the fixtures in mind, also the form of Brentford, there are definitely some better alternatives at the moment. Then you look at the other midfielders. I mean, Raheem Sterling was just a final nail in the coffin. He was benched because of an illness, and Chelsea went on to win 2-0 against Fulham in that local derby, and Raheem Sterling has been so frustrating. I got him in after that haul against Luton Town. As I've explained before, I think that was a reactionary transfer and a mistake on my part, but I justified that transfer and move because he faced Nottingham Forest and Bournemouth in the next 2 games, and he has a great record against both clubs, but it hasn't gone according to plan, and Chelsea still aren't convincing for me. They played well the other day, but I'm still not convinced about them in the long term, and I'd be quite happy to sell all Chelsea assets, despite the fact that they play Burnley away, and I think that's Sterling's best chance of a haul in a very long time. Then you go to the other 2 midfielders. Bruno Fernandes is just disappointing every single week, with the odd exception like Burnley away a few weeks ago, but Man United have no rhythm, no pattern of play, and whilst they've scored a lot of goals in the Champions League, they are not doing it in the Premier League, and I just think Bruno Fernandes is worth selling, despite how good of an option he could become later on in the season. And the final midfielder was James Maddison. He's another one who also blanked, and he hasn't produced a single return in home matches, whilst on the travels away from home, Maddison has returned in every single game. So let's see if he can translate that away form to the home matches, where he still plays well. I have to say, I think against Man United and Sheffield United, he has played very well in those 2 games, but he needs to get more goal output at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, and once he does, it will go to another level, and he's already one of the best assets in the midfield. It was quite surprising, but Man City lost against Wolverhampton Wanderers, and Haaland blanked as well when a lot of us captained him. I thought Haaland would score once or twice in a 2 or 3-0 victory for Man City, but it wasn't meant to be. They still played well, but they clearly missed Rodri in the heart of that midfield. And as for my other striker, he scored in that same game, Julian Alvarez, a great free kick, but that transfer of Watkins to Alvarez has absolutely decimated my rank for the time being, and I've lost out on 20 plus points. Add that on top of the Botman transfer, not getting him in last week, but doing it this week. That's also cost me another 15-20 points, and it's been an absolute disaster. I believe there's an element of misfortune towards those 50-50 calls and the timing of those transfers. Ultimately, selling Watkins, I can hold my hands up and say that was a mistake. As good as Alvarez is in all competitions, Watkins still had some very good long-term fixtures and was returning, albeit not scoring the goals in the first 5 game weeks. But despite Alvarez getting 8 points overall, which is a decent tally, Watkins got 23, and that's the highest return of any player in FPL so far this season. I knew from the get-go that double game week 7 would be an absolute calamity. Kieran Trippier was my vice-captain, but I put the armband on Erling Haaland, and I got 41 points overall with Estupinian coming off the bench. I took that -4 hit, so all things considered, 41 points, and I haven't even reached 400 overall points yet, so I am disappointed with the start of the season. It's probably the worst I've ever had, but I'm still looking to bounce back. I'm fairly confident I can do so, and the gaps between different ranks and also different targets aren't too bad. There is still quite a minimal difference, so I think 1 or 2 great weeks, even a good week, can propel me up the ranks quite significantly, but I am now at 3.4 million. That's 5 consecutive red arrows since game week 2, really. 6 consecutive red arrows, you could argue with that one, but I think the first 2 game weeks of the season were pretty solid from me. After that, it has just been an absolute nightmare. Be sure to join the league. You can see it there, 7EG67U. There's also an auto-join link in the description down below. But let's head straight over to my wildcard squad, what I've currently got at the moment, and also some alternatives in 2 or 3 key positions. It feels refreshing going into a game week without the likes of Turner or Onana as my goalkeeper. Bernd Leno could be between the sticks at home to Sheffield United, but I am considering Johnston as an alternative. Turner could still yet come in, and I rotate between him and Areola, but ultimately I'm looking to go for a solid goalkeeper option, and I think Leno is probably one of the best in game week 8. In the following weeks, though, I would start Areola, so there is this debate where you don't need to go for Bernd Leno necessarily, and as good as Leno is as a goalkeeper, Fulham are still very suspect defensively, and they lost 2-0 at home to Chelsea, which is a very poor result for them. So Leno is in here for now. He is not locked in. The alternative around a similar price would be Johnston. Apart from that, I'm not really interested in Flecken with the injuries to Brentford, and then otherwise the alternative is to downgrade to Turner and have 2 really cheap goalkeepers in Turner and Areola. I'm also making wholesale changes to the defence, including Matty Cash, who comes in for the first time this season. I had Tyrone Mings in game week 1, but he suffered an ACL injury during that 5-1 defeat to Newcastle United. So Cash comes in. I think he's a significant upgrade on that. And my defensive transfers this season have been an absolute nightmare. I've had Rico Henry also suffering an ACL injury. I've also had a few other injuries here and there, like Ben Chilwell out for several months, Sven Botman. So hopefully the curse definitely comes to an end at this point. Otherwise, maybe my recommendation recommendation to anyone watching is to just go for players that I don't go for, especially in the defence. But Matty Cash should be a great option over the next 5 game weeks, especially with fixtures like Luton Town coming up. I've also got Kieran Trippier, who remains in this squad, one of my only good transfers so far this season. And with the long-term fixtures for Newcastle United, they're great form, and Kieran Trippier himself has been absolutely on fire. I think there are so many positives to him. The only downside to having a Kieran Trippier is that it could prevent you from having a Salah and or Son in the midfield, and if not, it means no Haaland up front. My final defender in the starting 11 is Destiny Udogie. If I had the funds, I would possibly go for Pedro Porro. I mean, if I'm being quite honest, I technically do have the funds in the bank, but I also have some moves in mind in a few weeks' time, especially if I decide to go without Erling Haaland, and that could be a huge concern if I go for Pedro Porro over Udogie, and it would mean I could be priced out of such moves, and it could incur hits. So, of course, there is a lot of, different factors playing a part in that, but ultimately Udogie is a cheaper option by 0.2 million. He's more affordable, but if I had to pick one right now, I would consider Pedro Porro for sure. You also have to bear in mind, though, that Emerson Royal is back and he could get the odd start here and there, and Udogie is a bit safer from that perspective. So if you're going for a Spurs defender, Udogie or Pedro Porro are your best bets. Udogie might be a bit safer, whilst Pedro Porro is more exciting from an offensive perspective. Despite wildcarding, I have 2 injury doubts in the heart of my midfield, starting with Bukayo Saka, who could miss out against Man City. It probably will come down to a late fitness test, but Arsenal could potentially have a big boost here with the news that Saka is going to be in the England squad for next week. And whilst those games will be later on than Man City on Sunday, quite naturally, there is still a chance that Saka makes it. And I think Arsenal will do everything possible to have Saka available for that huge top of the table clash between Arsenal and Manchester City. If Saka is out, I've got a few alternatives I could downgrade to. I'll discuss that more so later on in the video. But Saka is still someone I want to keep, and probably the best Arsenal asset by some distance. The next midfielder is DIaby, another injury doubt. He will miss out in the Conference League for Aston Villa, but he still has a chance of featuring against Wolves away this weekend. And even if he doesn't, you've got the international break, and then DIaby will be available for Game Week 9 onwards when Aston Villa have a fantastic run of fixtures. I think Wolves away could be quite tough actually in Game Week 8, so I'm not expecting much from Watkins, Cash or DIaby per se, but over the next 5 in general, even potentially next 7 game weeks, Aston Villa have the best fixtures of any team, and they also offer some really good value in the defence, midfield and the forward line. My third midfielder is Mohamed Salah, but this is not set in stone because going for Salah would mean either no Heung-min Son or no Erling Haaland, and that could be a big concern for me. But Salah away to Brighton, I think that's a good captaincy option even. Whilst the Spurs midfielders would look a bit more appealing with Luton Town away, I think Brighton away is a great fixture for Liverpool, and for Salah, they can score plenty of goals. It should be a really high scoring game, and it will arguably be the best match of the weekend. The final 2 midfielders are James Maddison and his fellow partner in crime from Tottenham Hotspur, Heung-min Son. Both of them have some injury doubts heading into Luton Town away. I discussed this in the Transtips video. I think both of them will start and be available. You've got Spurs missing out on Brennan Johnson in Game Week 8. Solomon could be out for 2 to 3 months. You've got Perisic with an ACL injury. So Maddison and Son should be prepared for this game. Richarlison could even get a start as well. And if you're looking for some other differentials, Kulusevski could be a great pick for Game Week 8. But in the long term, I think James Maddison and Heung-min Son are much better FPL options. And if I knew they start for sure, then I just think they're a cut above from Richarlison and Kulusevski. You can dish out the famous old Fanas quote if you wish, but I'm going back to Ollie Watkins, and he's facing Wolves away in a fixture which I think could be quite tough for Aston Villa. A draw would not surprise me in the slightest, and Watkins could even blank in this match. But I'm looking at the other games coming up, and I think Watkins is one of the best forwards to have over the next 5 to 7 game weeks. After that, I'd be quite happy to maybe sell him on, but that could also be yet another mistake because he is fixture proof, as he demonstrated against Chelsea away and Brighton at home, getting 4 goals and 2 assists in those matches. And my final forward is Alvarez, who is in red hot form. He scored and assisted against Leipzig in the Champions League after coming off the bench, whilst Erling Haaland blanked in that match. So it's a tricky one to go about Erling Haaland. He does face Brighton at home and Bournemouth at home in the next 4 game weeks, and I think Haaland could go absolutely ballistic in those 2 games. Even against Arsenal and Man United away, you can't discount him from doing really well in those matches, especially with Arsenal gifting goals to the opposition week in, week out, and Man United are suffering very, very heavily at this moment in time. So this is not set in stone. Haaland could yet come in, but in order to do so, I would have to make a downgrade elsewhere, and the most likely sacrifice would be Mohamed Salah. After the news broke of Pervis Stupinian being out for a month, and this is confirmed by Roberto De Zerbi, I have swapped the Ecuadorian for Joachim Andersen, but there are some other considerations in this position, such as Gabriel, Saliba. Despite facing Man City, I can bench him and then start him against Chelsea away, and then the fixtures afterwards like Sheffield United at home and Burnley at home. And there's also Vladimir Soufal, but I've already got Areola, so I'm skipping him for the time being. But that position could certainly change. The Joachim Andersen one first on my bench, and also Jarrod Bowen could come in for either Bukayo Saka if he's ruled out, or Mohamed Salah, which would allow me to go for Erling Haaland in place of Julian Alvarez. So there's a few things I could swap here and there. I'll go to fpl.team and show you a few different alternatives I could make in key positions, but the bench would be Areola, Anderson, Burn and Archer, and all that's left to discuss in this part of the video is the captaincy, and I am favouring the Spurs attackers. Heung-min Son currently gets the armband with James Maddison as the vice, but with Maddison's away record, he's a serious consideration to usurp Heung-min Son as the captain, and my alternative other than these two would be Mohamed Salah if he stays in my final team. But I want to see your thoughts. Are you going for Salah over Haaland on your wildcard, or are you going for both? And which players are you sacrificing? Maybe Kieran Trippier instead, or Bukayo Saka? One consideration is to downgrade Bukayo Saka to a cheap midfielder like Pedro Neto, and then I can also bring in Erling Haaland in the forward position and have a front three of Watkins, Alvarez and the Norwegian robots. There's a lot to consider. Even the goalkeeper could change to Johnston or Turner, but I think the foundations are certainly there for the wild card, and it's only down to 3 or 4 certain positions which could change, and it ultimately depends on any more injury news we get over the coming days. On screen you can see fpl.team, and this squad would have 57.6 projected points with Johnston in goal, Trippier, Cash and Pedro Porro as the defensive three, so the Spaniard comes in for a doggy. Bowen, Son, Diaby, Maddison and Mitoma would be the midfield 5 with Watkins and Erling Haaland up front. No Mohamed Salah and no Bukayo Saka. The bench is also fairly similar. Areola, Burn and Archer retain their spots, but I've also gone for Gabriel in this wildcard draft, and I do like Gabriel in the long term. I think he offers great value at 4.7 million. He also has a lot of goal potential for a centre-back. If we actually compare it to my original team selection, which I showed you just earlier, that has a projected points of 54.8, which is even lower than the alternative squad I just showed you here, which has Mitoma, Erling Haaland, Gabriel, Pedro Porro coming in. So it's very interesting to see how the algorithm favours this squad over the other one in Game Week 8, but that doesn't mean it's a better wildcard squad, because this chip is so important in the long term, not just for one specific game week. The other team I want to show you is this, which has Turner and Areola as my goalkeepers, Trippier, Cash and Pedro Porro once again. Anderson and Burn will be my 4th and 5th defenders, and I'm going for a midfield 4 of Jarrod Bowen, Son, Diaby and Maddison, and my front 3 is Alvarez, Watkins and Erling Haaland. Let me know, do you prefer this draft over the other two, which gravitates towards a front 3 and no Mohamed Salah and no Bukayo Saka? So it's very interesting to see how these 3 or 4 key changes can just completely shift the perceptions of these wildcard drafts. I actually like all 3 of them, and I talked about a similar structure in my best wildcard team video. And as usual in FPL, UCL Fantasy or any other fantasy game, it can come down to some 50-50 calls, and you just have to hope that luck swings your way. In terms of this draft, you see with this 50-man squad, there is a lot of squad depth, which is both a positive and a negative. I will have benching headaches pretty much every single week, even in Game Week 8. Anderson, Neto and Burn, that could be a bench boost squad, you could argue, with Areola also between the sticks. But I do like this structure. The same goes for the other two. I want to see your preferences and thoughts in the comment section down below. And thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it or found it useful, then be sure to smash the like button and subscribe for new. Let's get this video to the 300 likes, and let's keep on pushing towards 21,000 subscribers and beyond. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, and check all the links in the description below for the Patreon and channel memberships for early access to videos, and also exclusive access to all my team reveals, and also the Discord server to engage with the community even further. There's also the FPL League where we have thousands of members. The same goes for the UCL Fantasy League as well, one of the biggest leagues in the world actually. So thank you very much for building that league up. I also appreciate everyone else for just stopping by, sending in super chats, all the love that goes around with my videos and streams. I'll see you very soon for more FPL and UCL Fantasy content, and good luck with Game Week 8.